Welcome students to this asynchronous session on qualitative research. EDRS 6210, I believe this is your fifth session, and the session today is entitled Designing Qualitative Research. So you've had 4 sessions already and you should be about ready to grapple with some design issues. Before we get into the meat of the matter, just be reassured that this video, together with the full PowerPoint presentation, as well as extra notes and exercises, will all be uploaded onto my e-learning. So, to introduce the topic, designing qualitative research. I remember in the first tutorial we had, one of my students said, when I asked about what their impressions of qualitative research were, she said that she thought it was not highly structured. And I thought to myself, well, she is right. But she was thinking about it not exactly negatively, but in terms of her previous experience with quantitative research in semester 1. So highly structured to her meant everything fitted together in lockstep fashion, in a linear way from the time it was conceptualized and moved through several logical and sequential stages to a climax, Whereas she found out that in qualitative, while we are not highly structured, there are certain elements of qualitative research that make it robust. For example, we have systematic procedures. And when you're doing a session like designing qualitative research, you would find that we do engage in systematic procedures that have to do with the nature of qualitative research. And therefore, in that way, it is considered robust. And these steps that we take or undertake are rigorous. They are just as rigorous as any other research paradigm. What may be causing her to make such assumptions is that it is also a flexible design, so that if you find things are not working out, for example, your initial premises and ideas about the phenomenon are not exactly on point, because what you're finding out, as maybe if you go to the site, is that you didn't understand something properly. You can go back and fix, in inverted commas, your research questions, for example, to suit your new and emerging understandings. So it is flexible and it is iterative or iterative, meaning there is always a going back and forth. And in the going back and forth, we could say that that is a rigorous procedure, because you're always learning new things about your phenomenon and inputting that into your design. So let us just begin this whole topic on designing qualitative research by admitting, yes, that it is not highly structured, but also showing that it is systematic, it is rigorous, and it is also flexible, and it is iterative. Moving to these slides now, let's look at the first slide, which basically tells you that research design has to do with planning. So a design is a plan. And always the words that should be reverberating as you are doing your planning is that the plan should be cohesive, and therefore the items enumerated, the problem, the research questions, the purpose, your data collection, and your data analysis, they should have all strong linkages, that they all stem from the problem. So your plan or your design should be cohesive, should be interrelated, and should be interconnected. Harry Walcott in 1990 provided a useful metaphor for research design. He said some of the best advice I've ever seen for writers happened to be included with the directions I found for assembling a new wheelbarrow. Make sure all parts are properly in place before tightening. Okay, so that is reminiscent of a good plan. You put everything in place and then you tighten. Actually, it may be more apt for quantitative research where they try to put everything in place and nothing much could change after that. So it's important to really plan everything down to the finest level and then you tighten. However, although these general principles are correct as well for qualitative, you will find yourself loosening the screws every now and then and repositioning everything, because remember it's flexible, and then tightening back the screws. So with qualitative you have some leeway. So let us look at qualitative research design in a little more depth. What you will find is that the main characteristics of qualitative research become your main design elements. In other words, the design protocol or the design procedures, for example, the systematic procedures we spoke to earlier, they come to life when you think of what are the characteristics of qualitative research. They give life then to your design elements. So when you're designing qualitative research, what you need to keep in mind are the characteristics of qualitative research. So if qualitative research have 10 characteristics, you should be looking out when you're doing your planning or your designing with 10 elements. Creswell gives a good definition or description of qualitative research from which we could extract those elements that we want to refer to as design elements. He says qualitative research begins with assumptions and the use of interpretive theoretical frameworks that inform the study of research problems, addressing the meaning individuals or groups ascribe to a social or human problem. So right away, Creswell is situating the research in a framework that you know about as social constructivism or hermeneutics, which really is about human beings in the world and how they are making meaning of this problem or this issue. So therefore you are understanding that in designing the research, this is the main thing you're going to be looking at. How do people make meaning? Not necessarily the issue in itself, but how they make meaning of the issue. To study this problem, qualitative researchers use an emerging qualitative approach to inquiry. The collection of data in a natural setting, sensitive to the people and places under study, and data analysis that is both inductive and deductive and establishes patterns or themes. So again, these are some of the characteristics. It is emerging, so we say that the design is emergent because you may go in and find things not to your liking or how you had earlier conceptualized it, so you could go back and change it. So it is continually emerging. Natural setting, where the people are really would be the best place to observe or interview them rather than a laboratory scene. And we go on to data analysis, which I would speak about a little later. That is both inductive and deductive. And in data analysis, you try to establish patterns or themes. The final written report includes the voices of participants, the reflexivity of the researcher, complex descriptions and interpretations, and so on. So in this short definition, description perhaps is a better way of describing it. Creswell has some of the main elements of a design of a qualitative study. We go on now to another description just to reiterate. The aim of qualitative research is to understand and represent the experiences and actions of people as they encounter, engage, and live through situations. In qualitative research, the researcher attempts to develop understandings of the phenomena under study based as much as possible on the perspective of those being studied. So this says much of what Creswell has said in different language, but you are getting the same ideas coming through. So it's left for us now to look at the characteristics of qualitative research, because we will be taking each of those characteristics and looking at it in terms of designing research. So they become automatically design elements. So I have in this table put down much of what I gathered from Creswell on what are the characteristics of qualitative research, which we are calling design elements today. And at the other side of the table, I would like us, if we are conceptualizing a study, to fill in on that side of the table what we mean, for example, by a natural setting. We will move then from the table to letting us fill in the first row, which is the natural setting. So we move to design questions 2. Now I have filled in this. In this, what is the design element here? How do we give it life? So I'm saying researchers gather up close information by actually talking directly to people and seeing them behave and act within their context. In the natural setting, the researchers have face-to-face interaction over time. So if natural setting is your design criterion, the other column that we just read means this is what is in your mind when you are planning it, that you must have them where they are. Well, in the COVID-19 situation, you will have to make the best representation of that as you could. You want to talk directly to them. You want to see them in action. For the most part, you want face-to-face interaction. So that will satisfy the element of natural setting. We move to design questions 3, participants' meanings. Now that is another criterion that we are looking at. Researchers keep a focus on learning the meaning that the participants hold about the problem or issue. Not the meaning that the researchers are trying to bring to the research or what you get in the literature. The participants' meanings further suggest multiple perspectives on a topic and diverse views. So you want to be true to when you say you want to find out participants' meanings. They might be inconvenient, they might be all over the place, you might not get a coherent way of looking at them in the beginning, but if you say you want to find out participants' meanings, you have to truly represent what you find. And so that is another criterion, design criteria. The next row talks about emergent design. What do you think the emergent design is? So in design questions 4, emergent design is the initial plan for the research. It cannot be tightly prescribed because many times you do not know exactly what you're looking for. So you have a sketchy design. And some or all phases of the process may change or shift after the researcher enters the field and begins to collect data. That's a big watershed. All the time you're conceptualizing and planning and doing as if. But now if you're actually in the field with your blueprint and it may not exactly match. Different aspects of the research may be conducted at the same time because it's not linear. So you may be conceptualizing, you may be preparing yourself, you may go into the field. When you're going into the field now, when you're actually interviewing or observing, you may be reconceptualizing. So you're there in the field, but you're doing reconceptualizing of what you have because it perhaps is not on point. So you are being iterative then. constantly in a research process that continues to turn in your mind. So that's the emergent design. It continues to emerge. Our next row is complex reasoning, inductive and deductive logic. So we go to design question 5 to see what that could mean. Now the inductive process is usually the process of reasoning that is attributed to qualitative studies. The researcher works back and forth from particulars like what the participants say, their language, to more general perspectives. So you could try to clump or coalesce or group certain statements that they are making, which is what you will be doing in data analysis, into larger frameworks called themes. First of all, codes, and then themes, and then categories, or some researchers say codes and categories and then themes. But you go from very small units of analysis, like what someone says, and it gets bigger and bigger as you theorize and you bring together different statements. So you're working your way bottom up to something akin to theory or akin to an explanatory statement. Deductive thinking, however, is usually the province of the scientific method, where you work from a hypothesis, a big thing, a hypothesis or a theory, and you try to find instances of that to support it. What we do in qualitative is that we do a lot of inductive process. But at the level where you are developing themes and something like pseudo-theories and so on, you are also engaging in deductive thinking. So it's a complex reasoning process that you are getting involved in. And it is a design element. You have to plan for it. You have to plan for how you are reasoning it out, even though that's at the later stages, the data analysis stage. The next row speaks of the researcher as the main instrument. What could that mean? So we go to research question 6. The researchers collect data themselves, and you examine documents, you observe the behavior, you interview people. So you are the main instrument, not necessarily the protocol that you devise. The instruments you design are usually designed by yourself, and they are open-ended. This whole idea in qualitative of the researcher as the main instrument invokes a kind of responsibility placed on the researcher that may not be so clear-cut in other kinds of paradigms where there are lots of checks and balances to keep the researcher objective and neutral and so on. Here the researcher has to take on the responsibility himself or herself in conceptualizing the research, making sure it's tight with the interview protocol, and making sure that in the interview itself, the researcher is cognizant of what are his or her main goals and purposes. And to do that, the researcher often has to do self-work, in trying to rid or suppress their own biases and usual ways of thinking. So this aspect of qualitative sometimes is very problematic to new researchers, and it's also very, I would think, inspiring, because to a large extent, when one could bracket or move away from one's initial ideas, one becomes more open to what the respondent is saying, and usually it may be things that the interviewer never thought of. So that is what is meant by the researcher as the main instrument. And another characteristic of qualitative research is that it really should be done with multiple methods. And multiple methods, we see researchers typically gather multiple forms of data, such as interviews, observations, and documents, rather than rely on a single data source. So you're dealing with human beings, and you're dealing on what they say and what they think they mean and so on. So it may be better if you could have two data sources at least. So you could try to, the word is triangulate or corroborate what may be said in terms of what is being observed. For your assignment for EDRS 6210, which is a small assignment, you will probably use only one method of data collection. But perhaps if you take it to the larger assignment at the end of your 2 years, EDRS 6900, you may want to use, and you're doing qualitative, you may want to use more than one method. So design question 8, we have the rest of the design elements that Creswell spoke of, and I have just put them together here. One is reflexivity, one is having a holistic account, and one is the approach. Well, you always have to say what qualitative research approach you are using. And you would have learned, I think last week in Dr. Harry's session, 5 major approaches that we follow Creswell and use: case study, phenomenology, biography, grounded theory, forget what the other one, ethnography. So 5 different approaches using qualitative methods. So it should be clear to the researcher, almost up front, but perhaps as the questions develop, the research questions develop, which of those methods could best answer his or her research questions. So the approach to qualitative is important. The holistic account merely means that you try to get as many of the, what would be called in the other paradigm, variables, what the participants touched on, as much as possible on the varied views they have on what are the important inputs into the situation. So it's a holistic account. You're trying to get as much as possible about what they think important. And the reflexivity of the researcher is something that should be part of your design or your plan. Reflexivity goes beyond being reflective, and it means at all points that the researcher manages to think about these questions, these issues in relation to how he or she thinks about them personally, always straining what is being said by the participants through his or her own lenses, and knowing that he or she is doing that, trying to get to a point where he is not exactly neutral, but he is separating out his or her own ideas and knowing that he is doing that from that of what he's hearing. So designing or planning for reflexivity may be something you think you could keep in mind all the time, but it is actually better to nail it down by planning to have like a research journal. So you keep track of your thoughts and your ideas and how they change over time based on what you are hearing in the interviews or what you are seeing in the observations and so on. So we move on to how do you begin? Where does design fit in? Now design doesn't come in very early. What you have first of all is something that intrigues you, a problem or an issue, and something that needs greater clarification, more depth of understanding and so on. So you have an idea, and it may be based on personal experience, your work setting. It may be based too on the research, things you have read in the literature. And so you develop a problem or an issue. Probably the most difficult part is to get that down on paper. You discuss it with your supervisor, your peers, you present in research seminars and you get feedback. So you refine the problem a bit. So what is the educational importance of it? What is the significance of it? You justify the need for such a study. You study whether is it researchable. Can I really get this information? So you are in the initial stages of designing a study that is important to you. So you outline your purpose and goals as far as you can. You construct the research problem, you write it down. You devise some research questions which address both the problem and purpose. And it is perhaps at this time you want to take on board design features. You want to really clarify and write down how you are going to do this study based on all the criteria that we just went through. Maybe we went through about 10. All those criteria that are characteristic of qualitative research, you begin to ask yourself, am I planning in this study to observe all of them or to address all of them? And as the green arrows show, it may be that you could go back and tweak the ideas and so on. So this becomes a cyclical sort of process that everybody has to get involved in. It's not something that you alone are doing because you're just not clear in your thinking. Everybody is undergoing this kind of process in getting clear about the research and in designing the research. So when you think you have your design kind of cohesive and so on, you want to make sure that these items are all very clearly implicated, so that your goals and purposes are clearly shown in your research questions and your methods and so on. So just to reiterate, why is the design important? The function of a research design is to ensure that the evidence, which is your data, that the evidence obtained enables you to effectively address the research problem, so that the design helps you then to answer the research questions. A common mistake made by researchers is that they begin their investigations far too early, before they have thought critically about what information is required to address the research problem. So people try to jump into the data collection stage without really thinking about what knowledge they want. Without attending to these design issues beforehand, the overall research problem will not be adequately addressed, and any conclusions drawn will run the risk of being weak and unconvincing. As a consequence, the value or the credibility of the study will be undermined. So this is really making a plug for planning, and more planning. So your research design is a plan. The research design refers to the overall strategy that you choose to integrate the different components of the study in a coherent and logical way, thereby ensuring that you will effectively address the research problem. It constitutes the blueprint for the collection, measurement, and analysis of data. In other words, another way of saying what the plan is involved, what it means to be coherent, and so on. Questions which determine the research design. What is your research problem? Can this be done qualitatively, or does it have to be done quantitatively? In EDRS 6210, of course, your answer will be qualitative. Which tradition of the paradigm best answers my question? So that is ethnography, etc., etc. Who are my participants and what are their demographics? For example, if your participants would be preschool children, and you think interview would be your method, clearly you have to think hard about how you are going to garner the knowledge that you want out of them as compared to, say, a teenager. So what might be the best method to collect data for this problem and group of participants? These are things you have to really think about hard and try to simulate or imagine in your mind being in the room with the person or online with the person and hoping that a researcher's nightmare doesn't happen to you when the whole interview just grounds to a halt, peters out, the other person just says, yes, miss, no, miss, I never thought of that, miss, etc., etc. You have to plan them so that these occurrences do not come your way. All right, so just reiterating again. For all kinds of research, including qualitative, possibly the key quality control issue deals with the validity of a study and its findings. A valid study is one that has properly collected and interpreted its data so that the conclusions accurately reflect and represent the real world. Conversely, studies in any field are worthless if they arrive at false findings. And he says, but studies should nevertheless use design features that will strengthen the validity of their claims and findings. And we are saying the design features are really the characteristics of qualitative research. So, after all is said and done, let us look at an example and see if we can clarify. I have made up this research topic. Perspectives of first-year MEd students at the School of Education, UWI St. Augustine, on their experiences of the program. Okay, so I made it up with you in mind so that it would be especially meaningful to you. Perspectives indicate qualitative and experiencing also indicates qualitative. So even as you look at the title, you know that this is a qualitative study. Now the research problem. Now it takes a while to get your research problem tight. And so I will go through this. It's actually 2 slides long, but show you how I developed the problem. And to show you as well that the design features of qualitative research, we're trying to keep them alive. So I'm saying, in developing countries, so I don't begin right away with us. I try to give a global perspective and kind of bring it down to us. In developing countries, the fate of postgrad students in educational programs and the nature of such programs has occasioned some concern. Chikoko 2020 found that in South Africa, there continues to be many students who leave without completing their studies. Apart from the cost and manpower implications, student dropout also causes damage to the individual's self-esteem and self-image. From the student's perspective, so now look, I am using literature that is qualitative and that is close to my own way of conceptualizing. He noted that organizational factors were crucial to the success or failure and the retention or dropout of the students, and that student integration into the institution is highly necessary. In Malaysia, Abd Majid 2010 found that MEd students indicated that much more could be done in order to prepare them to become creative and innovative researchers. So for example, a course like this, they would have critiqued. Their suggestions include revising the curriculum, in particular the content assignments and assessment. So I have tried to locate the problem in other parts of the world, so I'm getting support for this issue. I have chosen only 2 pieces of literature, and maybe in your larger study, EDRS 6900, you would need a little more support in crafting out your research problem. So now I go on to the other part of the problem. And I'll read it out because it's a bit crowded for you. In relation to Trinidad and Tobago, the teachers and administrators enrolled in the MEd program at the School of Education, UWI, like some of their counterparts in the developing world, are interested in being better teachers and leaders and in bringing about change in the education system. Now this is my way of trying to bring to bear why it is necessary and important to look at MEd students and their predicament. Hence, they represent a potentially significant group in developing the nation. Okay, so you can give yourself some kudos. However, they now bear the full financial costs of their program. I wasn't sure of this, but I put it in. Remember, this is largely made up. As the country faces continuing economic difficulties. In addition, there are full-time teachers and administrators during the day now engage in evening programs of study. It is therefore a potentially stressful time for these individuals who are required to successfully juggle the many roles they play. Johnson 2010. Now that is made up. I just put him in as a source for you to understand that there are certain claims sometimes that are made that you need to have a source. This researcher is a student on this program. Now notice that the location of the researcher is an important thing for the problem, which may not be important in other paradigms, but how the researcher is located is important for the readers to know. So this researcher is a student on this program and realizes that fellow students speak more about being overwhelmed than they do about the merits of their postgrad studies. So in addition to the global literature and so on, and in addition to the importance of postgraduate work and so on, I, as researcher, which would be somebody on your program researching you, would give anecdotal evidence then, observations that they are using to construct the program. While dropouts are not many, failures seem to be increasing. UWI 2017, now that is wrong, I just made up that. I have not found any study on the part of the Ministry of Education or any other entity which seeks to explore the perspectives of these educators who are also students, the meanings they make of their situation as they pursue a higher professional degree. The School of Education engages in routine student evaluations of courses and lecturers and holds regular staff-student liaison meetings. But data from these activities have not reached the research literature. So I am trying to carve out a space that my research problem could fit inside. A gap, therefore, exists in education about how these teacher students and administrator students are faring, how they cope, how they prioritize, and how they generally experience an intense program, not only for their own betterment, but also for that of the nation's children. So, remember the title was Perspectives of First Year MEd Students. So that title, Perspectives and Experiences, are very much represented in the blurb that you have here. The fact that there's a gap. We don't know much about MEd students and how they really feel about the program, even though there are routine, systematic things that the School of Education may have to find out about their experiences. So let us look then at the purpose and see if the design features are pulled right through. The purpose of this qualitative case study, or it could be a phenomenological study. So right up front, the very first line of the purpose, you are stating what qualitative research approach you are using, is to unearth the meanings. Now meanings, so remember, this is a paradigm that is couched in the social constructivist philosophy and hermeneutics, so you're looking for meanings. It's to unearth the meanings that two students on the MEd program, I'll come back to the two students, attached to their experiences as teachers or administrators who are now part-time students. Interviews and observations would be the main means of data collection. So I'm really reinforcing the qualitative nature of it, and in the purpose itself, I am saying how I'm going to try to extract the information. The study intends to capture something of their lived experiences, their challenges, their coping strategies, and their observations generally. So that is the immediate purpose. That is what I want to do. But I also have a larger purpose. Studies of this kind can bring to the attention of the institution the nature of the in-depth experiences of students that may not necessarily emerge through an evaluation form or from a staff-student liaison meeting. It is hoped that the findings of this study can bring an informed response from the School of Education, thereby making the student experience perhaps more meaningful and or comfortable. So the purpose is succinctly attached to the problem as was just outlined. Why I said I would come back to the two students, because usually when you're doing your studies for EDRS 6210, you can't engage with many participants because it is an in-depth exercise. I think we mostly accept 2 persons to be interviewed and so on. Of course, if you're doing a larger study, you will do more. Okay, so the idea of meaning making is coming through here. You can't have a purpose like this and use something like a questionnaire, for example. So with the purpose on one side, let's move across to look at what possible research questions. Now the first grantor, the main question, is directly constructed from the title. What are the perspectives of first-year MEd students on their experiences of the program? Okay? And usually you're asked to give 2 sub-questions and you may operationalize 1 or 2. How do first-year MEd students describe their perspectives of the program? And how do the 2 first-year MEd students describe their experiences of the program? Now, it may look like the same thing, but we take the words directly from the grantor question, and you could say that perspectives are general or large ideas people have, not necessarily from their own experiences, but of course it could be from their experiences. It could be from hearsay, what people have told them about the program, for example. And the second question is directly from their experiences. I want you to note how the questions are written. How do first-year MEd students describe? So it is incumbent on the researcher to really think about the words that the students are using, the kind of vantage point they are coming from, to put their whole response in context. Are they looking at it, for example, when they say, how do they describe? How does Julia, for example, describe her experiences and thus her perspectives? Could it be that she's a single mother who is juggling full-time teaching and this, and perhaps doesn't have transport? Well, that was pre-COVID. In the COVID era, it will be everybody at home doing it. You know, does she look at it then from that perspective of a beleaguered mother with plenty things to juggle? Or could it be that you are asking someone about their perspectives of the program and they haven't really thought about it very clearly, except that they want to get the paper, they want to get the MEd, and they are thinking in terms of promotion? So that how do first-year MEd students describe their perspectives? How do first-year MEd students describe their experiences? Could be made even more qualitative by the researcher keeping a distance in terms of looking at how a person is relating what they say they experience, perhaps, and trying to look at the underlying things that are influencing them. So we see the complexity of qualitative research here, because when people talk, it's not just what they say that you write down or you record. You actually have to be thinking about why may they be saying that, what vantage point they may be coming from. And so you are probing and questions like that to follow up. So we move to the slide on data collection. A very important design issue is, what knowledge am I seeking? Sure, you might say you want perspectives, but perspectives come in all different shapes and sizes. So I have here a list of the knowledge that qualitative researchers seek: perceptions, beliefs, experiences, ideas, emotions, facts in there, feelings, prejudices, thoughts, insights, opinions, faith. All of that represent the kind of knowledge that you are seeking. So I'm making a plug here for you to understand the complexity of the knowledge. It's not just what they say. How would what they say fit under any of these? How would you categorize that? And of course, then you have to think about what methods are most appropriate for garnering all this information. So, what might be the best method to collect data for this problem and this group? Now, first of all, when you are designing a study, you may not think about it as important, but you have to access the site, particularly if you are not a participant doing the interviews or the observations. If you are new to the site, you will have to have permissions. And ethics then runs through the whole study. You need to be sure that you are putting in place ethical safeguards all the time. So you need to get the required permissions. I know you may be teaching your class online and you may really be wanting to study them, and you may want to just give them a questionnaire and so on. And the temptation may be great because getting the necessary permissions tend to take time and so on. No, you have to follow the ethical guidelines for research. You have to decide, will interviews be most apt, observations, document analysis? Those are perhaps the three main data collection methods we have. How are you going to do it? How do you design your instrument or your protocol? Now, if it usually is a protocol, if you're doing an interview, the interview tends to be a semi-structured interview. Sometimes you have, if you are courageous enough, you could have full-flowing, conversational, unstructured interviews, which would be a horror for you to transcribe afterwards. Your best design perhaps is a semi-structured interview protocol where you're leaving enough, you've thought out your questions enough so they are not simply yes or no answers, and that they leave room for the student or the interviewee to ad lib and to speak freely and to give examples and so on. So how would be something that you would want to use? Not anything that gives just a yes or a no. Or do you believe that? And so on and so on. How are your interviewing skills? For many of you, you are novice researchers. So I want to make a plug that designing the qualitative study means that being conscious that you are not good at this yet, and that there are certain things about you yourself that might not make for a good interviewer. Are you a good listener? Or do you want to hurry the person through the protocol and as they answer question 5, you think about moving them on to question 6? But only later on, when you are transcribing the interview, you may say, but listen, they said so and so here. I could have asked this and I could have asked why and so on, but you went on quickly. And it could be just that you are not so confident and you want the exercise to finish in no time. So you have to really think about, as a design issue, your interviewing skills. Where is a big problem? Well, it used to be because when we were operating in face-to-face mode, you would have had to think of where had the best ambience, where was the best setting. Now we are constrained by Zoom and other forms of online contact, and you have to try to make that work So you also have to think about how pleasant am I? How approachable am I? How do I get people to give up information they have and I want? Okay? Now, all these kinds of questioning that you are doing beforehand that are going to help you in the design come directly from the philosophical basis of qualitative ontology. What is the nature of reality? In qualitative, we are saying that these people have multiple realities. So we want to be approachable enough. We want to be open enough. We want the questions to be open-ended enough for them to give of that. Epistemology, we are understanding in qualitative that the data we are seeking could come in the form of biases, could come in the form of prejudices. So knowledge itself is open-ended too, in terms of the variety of things we regard as knowledge. What people know or what people think they know influences their perspectives and their experiences. And axiology or axiology is about value. What are we valuing in all these questions and all these design elements that we are asking you to observe is what do people think? How do they make meaning? So it's always from the person's perspective. So it is subjective knowledge. So what we value is subjective knowledge. This slide also has a little box saying, what if things do not go according to plan? Well, we know what we do because it is iterative, it is flexible, we go back. And a very good strategy to use before you really get into your data collection phase is to get your feet wet a little bit. In the other paradigm, they might call it a pilot study. But perhaps with people who would not be part of your study or who, perhaps you don't know who to study yet. So your pilot study might give you some insights into how you might go along gathering your sample. So you could go into the setting, perhaps if you're not already established in the setting, you could go into the setting, get your permissions and so on, and have a look around and have a tour and so on. You would leave getting a better idea of the design features of your study that need to be tightened and tweaked. So finally, predispositions of quantitative and qualitative. These things, I think by now, are quite clear to you. For example, if we look under qualitative, reality is socially constructed. We are quite clear about that now. Variables would not be the word I would use, but whatever the main ideas or the constructs that we are studying, they are complex. We understand that, and they are interwoven with other things in people's minds. We want the emic perspective. In the quantitative mode is the ethic perspective that we are looking at. Our purpose cannot be a generalization as in the quantitative. We are looking for deeper contextualization of this issue, how it occurs. We are looking for how people interpret, that's the purpose. And really we are looking for how people make meaning and how the actors, who are the subjects, how they understand the world. The approach we are using, where while quantitative may begin with a hypothesis or a theory, the approach we are using ends, well, I don't really like the word hypothesis, but it ends with bringing together some ideas, which we call our findings, our themes, our categories, which may explain the behavior. So we are ending with something a little larger than we began with. Whereas in quantitative, we use formal instruments. In qualitative, the researcher is the instrument. It's a naturalistic setting, so it's not experimental. It's people in their natural settings. Inductive reasoning as opposed to deductive reasoning. Where in quantitative, it's components of the issue that are analyzed, whereas in qualitative is a holistic thing. You're searching for patterns, you're looking for pluralism and complexity. You are making minor use of numerals and arithmetic. You are more concerned with a descriptive write-up, what we call thick description. And thick description is really about writing narratives, using vignettes, using metaphors, trying to get the reader to see into the world of the subjects. And the researcher's role is not detachment and impartiality, not being objective, but really about personal involvement with a belief that that is what helps to pull out more of the information that you want, empathy and so on. The last phase, or the second to last phase, is data analysis, and you haven't reached anything near there, but the design elements are still being pulled through while you are doing the data analysis. And basically it is, am I being faithful to the voices of the participants? The ethical issues there continue to be, have I been successful in trying to keep out my own ideas and prejudgments and letting what they say be addressed? And am I always trying to keep up the tenets of social constructivism and hermeneutics as I analyze data? And your final stage of your thesis or your study is writing up. And design issues continue in how you write up. And ethics too continue to be ever present. So I'm saying striving to maintain a focus on the participants and their perspectives and experiences is what design issues are about in the final write-up. Portraying their lives, crafting a compelling narrative, letting the reader in to gain some insights about the author's about another's lived realities. And let me just end by saying something on the researcher's voice. It could change. It could become more analytical as the discussion proceeds, attempting to make comments, draw conclusions, bring in the literature, return to the research questions, and so on. There are many ways in which the writer could do, for example, the final section. It could begin with the verbatim language. You're using the verbatim language of your participants to show how they understand the MED experience and so on. The researcher could interweave there and then his voice or her voice in a more neutral way, showing that this is incompatible with this, or this is a strong feature or theme coming out. Or the researcher could wait till the end and have like a section where the voice changes, and it could become almost like a quantitative researcher writing in the third person, where the researcher now takes off his emic hat and all that and tries to write as impartially as he could or she could about what are the main features of the experiences or the perspectives of MEd students. To what extent do they make sense? They make sense to the people who have them, but to what extent are they upheld or justified by how things are? So, and to bring in the major themes that prevailed in the analysis and to bring that in and discuss them, perhaps in a more removed way. Okay, so what we have done is gone through in great detail what designing qualitative research means for your study for EDRS 6210. It should be clear-cut and it should be easier to do because you are doing a small study and it is easy to pull the threads right through from the beginning to the end where you are writing up to show how the same naturalistic ideas are there, the same things about participant meanings are there, the same things about striving to give the participant voices and hold back the researchers' voices are there. Really and truly, it is to show that in the final analysis, social construction and hermeneutics undergird the entire process. Thank you. The next session would be on data collection. Now that would be a synchronous session where you are required to be on my e-learning for plenary and your tutorial session. So thank you very much.